in looking at these paragraphs through from 439 through 449, I'm not going to be able to touch on each one of the questions, but I'm going to just pick out a couple more of the questions to look at, and because they offer the principles that we need to follow in terms of how we should approach the seventh commandment, how thou shalt not steal, but how that affects us in our economy and our practices, our economic practices. What is the church's stance on capitalism or the free market economy? Asks question 442. Any form of capitalism that is not embedded in an established system of law runs the risk of detaching itself from the common good and becoming a mere means for individuals to make profit. The church rejects that decisively. On the other hand, she supports a free market system which is at the service of man, prevents monopolies, and ensures that all are supplied with employment and the vitally necessary goods. And so the common good is something that the businesses really need to be aware of as well. To the extent that they enable men, families, and associations more adequately and readily to attain their own perfection. True commerce is something that you want to help, should help to provide that. Because again, if you don't have human beings who are going to be helping support an economy through their own spending and through the work that they do, there is no reason for an economy. The human person is of first and foremost importance. That's why the church has always had a great love for the poor, the materially poor, but also those who are spiritually and emotionally poor as well. But question 449 asks, what significance do the poor have for Christians? Love for the poor must be in every age the distinguishing mark of Christians. The poor deserve not just a few alms. They have a claim to justice. For Christians, there is a special obligation to share their goods. Our example in love for them is the poor Christ. And so we do want to take care of those who are poor and to give alms as much as we are able. We have the church asks us, one of the precepts of the church is that we give to the support of the church. And that part of the reason being the church is going to help to take care of the needs of the poor, but we don't just have to give to the church. If we can give to the poor in some way, to give to a charity that is going to take care of some specific need. You think of a homeless shelter that is going to take care of those who are suffering in some way. They have no job, they have no home. If they'll provide meals for them, to give money directly to a shelter like that. I know when I was in high school growing up, we worked at a homeless shelter in Denver, Colorado, and it was really amazing to witness that. I had grown up rich practically compared to these poor folks who were living in downtown Denver, but it was really neat to see the way that they were taken care of. But the shelter would not have been running without the generous support of donors who gave money, who also gave time, but those who could would make donations in some way of food and clothing for the support of the poor. We really need to be willing as Catholics, as Christians in society, to put our money where our mouth is. I think another way we can support the poor, I mentioned the spiritually poor, those who have fallen on hard times spiritually. One example of this, I would say, is to give money to like a crisis pregnancy center. We as Catholics, we're pro-life, and we want to support initiatives that support life. But if organizations like crisis pregnancy centers have no money to run, how can they be an outreach for girls who are pregnant unexpectedly, but are nonetheless in a situation where they're pregnant and they don't want to abort the baby? We want to provide the means we can to help that baby come to life, and so it's good to give support to those who are spiritually poor, as in that case. We as Catholics want to exercise the corporal works of mercy and the spiritual works of mercy, and those are enumerated in questions 450 and 451. The corporal works of mercy, to literally take care of our corporal needs, our bodily needs, and they are to feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, shelter the homeless, visit the sick and the imprisoned, and to bury the dead. Again, taking care of those bodily needs that we have. And to take care of spiritual needs through the spiritual works of mercy. They are to instruct the ignorant, to counsel the doubtful, to comfort the sorrowful, to admonish the sinner, to bear wrongs patiently, to forgive all injuries, and to pray for the living and the dead. To assist people to grow spiritually, those who do not have that spiritual relationship with God, in whatever way we can, to help them to connect with God in some way. One of the things that Mother Teresa would do, who was so wonderful in the love that she gave to the poor, she knew full well that she could not give them Christ if they were hungry. And so she had to provide for their physical needs first, their corporal needs first. And once there was some contentment there and some peace of soul there physically, it was then that people were more open to talking to her and being open to hearing about Jesus Christ and His love for them. That concludes this discussion on the 7th commandment. You didn't know there was so much on the 7th commandment, you shall not steal. There's a lot there that we as Catholics embrace and things that we want to learn about through that 7th commandment. Next, I would like to look at the 8th commandment. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Question 452 asks, what does this 8th commandment require of us? The 8th commandment teaches us not to lie. Lying means consciously and intentionally speaking or acting against the truth. Someone who lies deceives himself and misleads others, who have a right to know the full truth of a matter. Lies are an offense against justice, and lies are an offense against the truth. And what is truth? Or maybe a better question, who is truth? We know the truth is Jesus Christ. Pope Benedict says, and he says it in a sidebar, in a quote on page 247, "Indeed, Jesus Christ is the personified truth who attracts the world to Himself. The truth radiating from Jesus is the splendor of truth. Every other truth is a fragment of the truth that He is and refers to Him." And so when we think about truth in any sphere of our lives, it all has some association with Jesus, whether we realize it or not, because He is the core, the essence of truth, who came and dwelt among us. He witnessed to the truth when He predicted that He would rise from the dead, and then He rose from the dead. He's the only person in history who predicted that He would, His own death and His own resurrection. That's actually, we see that in the Gospel of John, when Jesus was talking to the Jews and He drove the money changers out of the temple, and the Jews said to Him, "What sign have you to show us for doing this?" And Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But Jesus spoke of the temple of His body. He made that prediction. He stood good on that prediction. He rose from the dead. And so Jesus is the truth. He is our point of reference. When Jesus was talking to Pilate after he was arrested, and Pilate asked Jesus, "What is truth?" Jesus had no response for him right away. But again, we know that there was that, Jesus had already predicted way back that He promised that He would die and that He would rise from the dead. He Himself was, He spoke the truth, He was a witness to the truth. When you look in the Webster's Dictionary, and I remember looking in my Webster's paperback dictionary from 1984, it defines truth as, the first definition it gives, a being true, specifically sincerity, honesty, conformity with fact, reality, actual existence, correctness, and accuracy. And so when we think about truth, we think about the correspondence with what we recognize with our own senses and with what is going on outside of us, because we trust our senses and we don't question them. We know that, and that's something that we learned from Aristotle back in the Greeks, that correspondence of mind and reality is the definition that Aristotle gave of truth. We trust that we see what is going on outside of us is actually what is happening. And there is a point of reference outside of us that we recognize. We are not the center of the universe. We're not the center of creation. Although I think sometimes people think that their opinions are absolute. There is a very subjectivistic mentality that everything that I say is, that's the way it's got to be and that's the way it is. And they have no point of reference outside themselves. They have no relationship with Christ, who is the truth, because we can speak with a great deal of certainty when we do have that relationship with Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life. But if we have a very subjectivistic mentality, then we're not going to be able to have that same relationship with the truth. When you think about those who might think, well, if it's okay for me to live with my boyfriend or to live with my girlfriend because, I feel like this is a good thing, and they see that as a truth for them, they don't have a very strong relationship with Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life, because they've or it's been clouded in some way. They've got this opinion that they define the truth, when in fact we know that we have that relationship with Christ, who provides that definition of life for us. So in terms of really living up to the truth and being truthful in our lives, the questions, looking at question 453, what does our relationship to the truth have to do with God? Living in respect for the truth means not only being true to oneself. More precisely, it means being truthful, true to God, for He is the source of all truth. We find the truth about God and about all of reality quite directly in Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life. If we skip ahead to question 454, how strongly obligatory is the truth of the faith? Every Christian must give testimony to the truth and thereby follow after Christ, who before Pilate said, "For this I was born, and for this I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth." It's very interesting, those who have given themselves to be witnesses to the truth, and the ones who come to mind are the martyrs, particularly the martyrs in the early church, and even martyrs in our modern day, who had a love for Christ, who is the truth, above all things, and they didn't care what anybody else thought about them. You think about John the Baptist, who we could consider to be maybe the first martyr, because he witnessed to the he's not the first official martyr of the church. We always consider St. Stephen the deacon to be the first one who died for Christ. But I like to think of John the Baptist because he was preaching very zealously of the coming of Christ, and he even died as a witness to the truth of the good of marriage because of the relationship that Herod had with his brother's wife, Herodias. He ended up losing his head over the deal. And John didn't care what was going to happen to him. He was willing to die for that truth, that marriage is a relationship between one man and one woman. Modern day martyrs. You think of St. Maximilian Kolbe, who died during World War II in Auschwitz, who died as a witness to the dignity of a human being. He died in the place of another man who had been chosen by the commandant of the camp to go to the starvation bunker. And St. Maximilian Kolbe stepped up and said, "Look, this man is a married man. He has a family. Don't take him, take me. I'm a Catholic priest." And the commandant of the camp was so struck with this willingness to die for the good of another person. He didn't have anything to say. If you've ever heard of the accounts of St. Maximilian's martyrdom, it's a very moving but just a quiet way that he steps up and quietly volunteers his life for the good of this other man. And he ended up dying 14 days later in the starvation bunker. But St. Maximilian was not, it wasn't a matter of, kind of a suicide mission. Someone was going to die, and he willingly gave himself up for the good of the one who had been chosen. He stood up in his stead. And so those martyrs, they really witnessed to Christ and are witnesses to the truth. If you look at question 455, it asks, what does it mean to be truthful? Truthfulness means that one acts sincerely and speaks honestly. The truthful individual guards against double-dealing, misrepresentation, malicious deception, and hypocrisy. The worst form of untruthfulness is perjury. if you look at 456, it asks, what should you do if you have lied to, deceived, or betrayed someone? And we know that in justice, we have to make those rights wrong. We need to go back and apologize to the person if we've lied or deceived them in any way. Also, when we have a relationship with those around us, you think about the trust that is violated when we lie, when we are deceptive, or when we're two-faced. You think about the case of judging someone rashly, or speaking about them behind their back by detracting about them, or damaging their good